Okay, so I think we're just about on time. I'm going to just give a very brief overview of Community Energy Scotland and the Energy Learning Network, the project through which this webinar is brought to you today. And I must apologise because I should have the ELN logo on my screen, on my background. And I don't have it, so I must apologise for that. That was an oversight on my part. But ELN is very much part of this webinar and delivered through it. So the ELN is the Energy Learning Network for short, and I will be using the term ELN instead of the full name, just so you're aware. So Community Energy Scotland, for anyone who's not already familiar with us and what we do, I'm just going to put my prompts up in front of me because I have got a dreadful memory. Not that I don't remember what we do, but in the moment, I'm sure you understand. Okay, so in a nutshell, we're here, we're a member-led organisation, and we enable decarbonisation project development and delivery by communities in Scotland. We support community capacity building and technical learning, and we promote the understanding of community energy and its far-reaching benefits. We're an independent charity, and we were established we've been established in the current form for just under 20 years now, and we are specialists in community energy, as you would expect. We have experts in our midst in the practical support of community energy, whether that's engagement specialists or technical specialists or data management specialists. And we're also the voice for community energy at UK and government level and sector decision maker level as well. And that's the work that a lot of people don't see happening. But we are advocates essentially for community energy at official levels in Scotland and the UK. Our members consist of, we've got over 450 members, and they will consist of community energy organisations, as you'd expect, community anchor organisations as well, also community-owned businesses and community councils and climate hubs. They form the majority of our membership, with the majority of that group being community energy and community anchor organisations. The energy learning group, I should mention actually, because people do confuse us with Local Energy Scotland. It needs to be remembered that Community Energy Scotland isn't a funding organisation. We have to find our own funds for the projects that we support communities with, and we also have to create our own income for our core operations to keep the organisation going day to day. And we do that with a shared-owned, very small wind farm in the Borders with a housing association, and we share the income that we get from the grid with the housing association, and that's one of the main, or that's the main way that we create our own income in order to survive, if you like, as an organisation, and we're then in a position to apply with communities for funding for the projects we support them with. So I hope that makes sense to those who are not already familiar. The Energy Learning Network, that's a 4-year project which started last year. It's a partnership project. It's funded by the National Lottery until 2028, and we work we work alongside, I should say, our counterparts in England, Wales, and Northern Ireland, with two other partners, the Centre for Sustainable Energy and also the Ashton Climate Solutions, who is the lead partner. The idea behind the Energy Learning Network essentially is to help increase the capacity of groups who want to work in community energy, whether they've never done it before or whether they want to take that next step and develop what they've done already. In terms of to try and help that capacity grow, areas that we are working on through the project are developing resources, especially online resources, and that can include things like recordings of webinars like these, hosting webinars. We listen to feedback from our members and others in terms of what they want us to deliver in terms of the webinar topics. So feedback is important, and we'll touch on that a bit later on as well. We also try and link groups up with each other, whether that's fellow community groups, anchor organizations or energy organizations, but also link those groups up with other stakeholders who are able potentially to support them as well. And that could include people, organizations like the local council, for example. We try to enable collaboration as well. That's another area that we're able to help with the ELN. So anybody who wants to be connected up with somebody, we will try our best to make sure that happens. And we're there for people to come back to us to help facilitate any work that they want to try and do together, to enable their community energy development plans to flourish. So that's enough from me, I think, for now. I'm just going to click back onto my schedule to keep me right. I think I'm 1 minute over time, so I do apologise. Anne, I am now going to pass over to you.
Okay. Hello, everyone. If you see me looking at a different angle instead of right into the camera, that is because I have 2 screens. So I hope you can all see this. So yeah, hello everyone. I work for Planning Aid Scotland, and we'll be taking you through some of the planning considerations we think you should be aware of when you are looking to develop energy for your community. Yes, there you go. So I'll take you through who we are, what planning is, planning policy, different types of planning applications, and the application process. I will aim to do so in 30 minutes, but Kat, feel free to stop me if you think I'm going over time. And as I understand, well, this session is being recorded, and we can also share the slides afterwards, so do not feel any pressure to try and type everything down that I'm saying. You will have access to all of this later on. So planning in Scotland has been around for 30 years now, and we've always had the ethos of helping people trying to navigate the planning system, which can be very complicated. We offer advice, training, community engagement, and we are a volunteer-led organization. I think about 30% of town planners in Scotland volunteer for us. So that's actually very special, and we get very good engagement from our volunteers. I'll just delve more into our planning advice service. This planning advice service is free to most people, community groups, community councils, business startups, and individuals. So if you do have any more particular planning questions in relation to your application, or your plans as a community, you can find us online, fill out a form, and we'll give you independent and impartial advice on whatever you need to know about planning. We keep it confidential, and all the planners that give advice are chartered planners, so feel free to use the service. So what is planning? Before I go into what planning is, planning applications are in most cases determined by the local planning authority. I will often refer to as the council, but what I really mean is the local planning authority. It's the local planning authority who determines planning applications and carries out many other town planning functions. We have 32 councils and 2 national park authorities, which actually means we have 34 local planning authorities. So that is definitely something to bear in mind. So the purpose of planning, and this has been set out in law, is to manage development and use of land in the long-term public interest. So any planner working in Scotland works along to kind of establish this. Development means the carrying out of building, engineering, and mining works and other operations in, on, over, and under land. So pretty much anything is managed by planning. It also includes the making of any material changes in use to any other buildings. So if you change a building from residential to an office, or an office to a shop, for example, that's a change of use. So that's also considered planning. That is to say that pretty much anything in theory requires planning, from solar panels to wind farms to air source heat pumps, battery storage, and so forth. And that's all managed under planning legislation. A bit of the Scottish context in terms of energy development. I'm sure many of you are aware. We have the Climate Change Act 2009. We have an updated climate change plan. There's also currently a new draft out for the next climate change plan that Scottish Government is currently consulting on. And there's also a draft energy strategy. That is to say that all of these documents are further supporting the development of, any development that contributes to net zero and the mitigation of climate change. So in terms of looking to develop community energy, the wider legislative and policy context is in your favor. I would also like to note that a planning application does not equal a building warrant. Building warrant and building standards are about the quality and safety of a building. These are a different set of regulation and laws. So in some cases, you may need to apply for both planning permission and building warrant. However, I'm a planner and I have a town and planning degree, and I have very little knowledge about building warrants, and I cannot advise you on building warrants. Planning policy, how are planning applications assessed? How it's done in Scotland, and it's slightly different from England as well. So that is also something to bear in mind, especially if you're having just an online browse. The development plan in Scotland is statutory consideration. That means that any planning officer who gets allocated a planning application has to review your planning application based on the development plan. The development plan consists of the national planning framework and the local development plan. However, there's other plans like local place plans and regional spatial strategies, and often local authorities or council has also got different guidance, and those other plans are all material consideration, which I'll delve into later on. But yeah, so the two key plans are the national planning framework and the local development plan. What I think can be very helpful is once a planning officer has made their assessment, they have to write something that is called the report of handling. You can access those report of handlings of any planning applications online, and that explains the approach of what planning policies a planning officer has looked at and all other objections and support letters and consultation letters. It's all summarized in the report of handling. So that gives you an idea of how a planning officer approaches policy. So the National Planning Framework is a Scotland-wide document with planning policies which are used to determine all planning applications. So regardless what type of planning application comes through in any given council, the NPF4 has to be used to review that proposal, and it has widest spatial strategies, but it also has 33 planning policies. So that's actually quite a lot of planning policies a planning officer has to go through. Some key policies in terms of renewable energy development are Policy 1, tackling the climate and nature crisis, climate mitigation and adaptation in Policy 2, and Policy 11 on energy. I think that policy is about 2 pages long. I've just taken a little screenshot of the main principle of Policy 11. It basically states that renewable energy development should be encouraged, promoted, and facilitated for both on and offshore developments. But then, as the policy description moves on, there is also considerations because renewable energy can have an impact on various things. This is just a list of things you need to make sure you address during your planning application. Again, if it's just a smaller development that you're proposing, for example, solar panels on a community hall, not all of these considerations may apply. For example, impacts on aviation may not apply if you're just looking to put down some solar panels on a building. However, if you maybe proposing a bigger wind turbine then, and you're in a particular location, aviation may become an issue. So I suggest that you go into the NPF4 and have a look at policy 11 as you're thinking about developing your renewable project. Then moving on, every council, so while the national planning framework is a national document, every council or local planning authority is required to also develop their own local development plan. I've just again taken some screenshots on newer and older local development plans, which are still all relevant, and just show you that there is different styles in which those development plans can be written in. The easiest way to find them often is using an online search engine, putting in the name of the council and then the words local development plan. That hopefully should bring you to the right web page. I suggest you look at general design policies. They're often also called overarching policies. Specific policies on energy that you are likely to find in infrastructure, for example, and the proposal maps. And because energy developments are a really big topic at the moment, more and more councils also have additional guidance on what they would be looking for in terms of energy development. So also try and figure out whether there is some additional guidance out there within your council area. Proposal maps are very important. For example, in 5, they have an interactive map, so you can scroll through the maps interactively. Other councils have PDFs, so it might be a bit harder to find it with interactive maps. It's sometimes easier because you can just put in your address and see whether any policies apply. Often in terms of color, yellow or red is for housing. Blue, here it's called local shopping center. Blue often signifies a town center, for example. And then usually green is used for any landscape and open space protections. And often it allows you, especially in interactive maps, to click on, and it tells you what policies will apply if you are looking to develop your project on that site. I want to highlight that there is conflicts between policies, and that is to be expected. For example, policy 11 on energy, supports renewable energy, but some people may argue that policy 4, natural places, can stand against that. For example, if you would place a wind turbine somewhere else. So this conflict between policies is acknowledged by the Chief Planner of the Scottish Government, Dr. Fiona Simpson, and she's written a letter about this, and she says the NPF4 must be read and applied as a whole. Factors for and against development will be weighed up in the balance of planning judgment. That means that a planning officer has to consider all planning policies and then make a balanced judgment based on everything we know and based on all the policies that are for and against, whether a development should be approved or not. This is a slight intermission on permitted development. So in some instances, you do not need planning permission. This is set out within the permitted development order. The permitted development order is actually amended a lot of the times, and there is guidance out there that gives you a bit of a direction on what's allowed, what you can do without needing planning permission. However, there are some key exemptions. For example, if your building is a listed building, or if your proposal is in a conservation area, then you are likely will be needing planning permission. Equally, you can often do more to the front of the building than to the back of the building, and you're allowed to do small changes and small developments. However, larger developments will again need planning permission. So you have the householder one. So if you want to do anything on domestic building, the guidance on the householder permitted development rights should be considered. And then if it's non-domestic, so for example, a community hall, then you would have to look into the non-domestic document. guidance. Some examples are fences and gates to up to a certain height. Small substations can be built. Statutory undertakers are allowed to put down underground lines. For example, the condition there is that they have to put back the kind of ground as they found it. And you can also do smaller domestic and non-domestic developments such as solar panels and air source heat pumps. However, I would say there is very strict criteria and exemptions that apply, and you should seek planning advice before moving forward without applying for planning permission. And that's, for example, something we can do. So you could fill out our online form and then get advice from one of our chartered planners on whether your plan is, whether that falls under permitted development or not. So different types of planning applications. So we're moving back. So let's say you do need planning permission and you need to apply. There's two main types of planning applications, and I'll make a note on energy consent applications. So you have what is called local developments. Those are assessed under a local planning application, and that applies to any infrastructure that generates up to 20 megawatt of energy. That's usually small solar farms and heat pumps, or even just like solar panels on a roof. And the time to reach a decision on those applications is about 2 months. And there is no statutory pre-application consultation, so you do not have to do any public consultation before moving on with an application like this. This is in contrast to major developments. So major developments is infrastructure that generates between 20 megawatts and up to 50 megawatts of energy. Those are larger, smaller farms, solar farms, smaller wind farms, hydro schemes, and BESS, so battery storage systems. They're considered under a major planning application, and there is a statutory pre-application consultation necessary before you put in your planning application, and then the time to reach your decision is 4 months. So for major applications, the statutory pre-application is often considered, is known as a PAN. So usually when you go on the council's website, you can see that here on the picture that I've taken. It's referenced as /PEN at the end. You have to do your pre-application notice 12 weeks before you submit your actual planning applications. You have to hold a minimum of 2 public events. Those have to be advertised in a local newspaper, and you also have to inform all relevant community councils of your plans. At the end of your 12-week consultation period, you have to write a report. That's usually referred to as a statement of community engagement, and it should outline what concerns were raised and what changes, if any, that you've made to this design based on that public consultation. So yeah, for you to note, there is infrastructure that generates more than 50 megawatts of energy. And if that's the case, your application would fall under Section 36 and 37 of the Electricity Act. So all of a sudden, if your renewable energy development would fall out of the Town and Country Planning Act, so that's everything that I've talked to you before, and it would suddenly fall under the Electricity Act, in which case it's a more it's a different system, but essentially in Scotland that means it would be the Scottish ministers who would be making the decision. So as I mentioned, over 50 megawatt of energy has to be generated, or if you would be suggesting overhead lines, then anything that carries between 11 kilowatt and 400 kilowatts of electricity. So that would fall under the energy consents application. And then it's the Scottish Government Energy Consents Unit and not the council who would be assessing your planning application. However, as I understand, most kind of schemes run by communities to generate energy are usually under those 50 megawatts. So I don't think it's something that you should be too worried about. So yeah, it's just saying we're focusing on planning application and on the town and planning legislation rather than the Electricity Act. The application process. So I'll take you through pre-application documents that you need to submit, thinking about your neighbors, validation, assessment, and decision. So the journey of a planning application should start with ideally some pre-application advice, which is optional, but I'll talk you through it, and the pre-application notice, which I already talked about, that's only relevant for major planning applications. Then we'll get to the validation stage. So once you submitted your planning application, they will check whether you've submitted all your relevant documents. Your case gets allocated to a planning officer and your neighbors are being notified. Then the planning officer will move on to assess the site, engage with the public, gather consultation comments, review policy, and then it comes to the decision stage. And following the decision, you'll get a decision letter that will explain whether your planning permission has been granted with condition, or has been refused. So, pre-application advice. This is a paid service provided, I think now by every council in Scotland. It is paid, however, it's a very good service because it highlights any policy and relevant guidance. So in case you may have overlooked anything through pre-app, that guidance should be highlighted to you, and it's an informal view on the likeliness of you receiving planning permission. However, it's not a guarantee, because once you submit your planning application, there will be a full in-depth consideration of all policies, but it may help you identify some key issues. For example, planning officer may be like, yeah, we're okay with you putting down some solar panels. However, you can't put down 100 panels, but we would be okay with 70 panels, for example. So it's a positive early dialogue with the council, and then the council is also aware that you are planning on doing this project. Through this engagement, they'll also talk you through on documents to be submitted. There is some key documents such as the application form, proof of payment, location and site plans, floor and elevation plans that are usually expected with any planning application, regardless of what it is about. If there's any of these documents missing, your application will not be validated, and if it's not validated, it will just cause further delay. So always make sure you have all the key documents ready. Also through pre-app, some additional surveys, for example, on trees or on flooding may be requested that will allow you to prepare those documents before you submit your planning application. If you submit your planning application and a planning officer is like, I will need some more information on trees or on great crested newts or whatever, that will again delay, because the planning officer may be like, I cannot make a decision on your proposal until I have further information on this one specific topic. Heads of planning guidance on validation is quite a chunky document, but it does kind of set out what is usually expected as part of any submission. Once you have all your documents ready, you go on the eplanning.scot website and you've uploaded all your documents, you fill out the application form online, and then it's sent to the right planning authority or council to review your application. Once your application has been validated, a neighborhood notification will be sent out. In terms of planning, a neighbor is anyone living within 20 meters of the application boundary. Sometimes neighbors who consider themselves neighbors get upset because they did not get a letter. However, especially, for example, with wind farms and things like that, those are usually a bit more remote from the closest house. So they may actually be more than 20 meters away from the next property. So no one would get an actual letter. However, in those cases, usually you have to put out a sign at the application site that there is a development proposal. And as mentioned, especially with major applications, you would need to put out a notice into the newspaper as well. So the wider public would get notified, but not necessarily direct neighbors if those direct neighbors are not within those 20 meters. Anyone can comment on a planning application. You usually get a representation per household. And you have, from once the notification goes out, the public has 21 days to comment on the application. This is where material considerations get important. So although I previously explained that a planning application is determined in line with the development plan, there is something called material considerations that could sway a decision in another direction. This gives the planning system in Scotland a discretionary element. However, what is a material consideration, and especially if you as a community are proposing a development and some people in your community might be against it, I think you understanding what a material consideration is will help you have a discussion with those people who may not be in support, to kind of have those relevant discussions. The two test points of what material considerations is, and we have a information sheet on that. So if you go on our website, we have a bunch of resources, and one of them is an in-depth explanation of material considerations. So they should be related to the purpose of planning and should be fairly and reasonably related to a planning application. What that means, for example, the cost of energy in your area or your property value will not be considered a material consideration as part of any proposal, because they do, even though if you're a neighbor, it does not relate to whatever is being proposed. Your property value is your property value, and the cost of energy is set by Ofgem and market factors. So that has the piece of land next to you that should be developed has no relevance to it as such. So it's not considered material consideration. However, existing planning history, so if multiple wind farms, for example, have been refused, or if you have a listed building and you want to make changes to a listed building, but previous similar changes to that listed building have been refused, your previous refusal, for example, may make a case against any future refusal unless there is a significant change. As I mentioned, other guidance and policies may be material. Comments from statutory consultees may also be nuisances such as noise, smell, fumes, and strong lights are also material consideration. The visual appearance and the relationship to surroundings and any loss in daylight and overshadowing may also be a material consideration. So again, if you look at any report of handling, a planning officer would set out all the comments that have been done by the public. It will then set out what's considered a material consideration and what's not, and then it sets out how much weight there has been given to every single material consideration. And that will help then explain the decision that a planning officer has made. In terms of you dealing within your community with any representations, I do think even if no pre-application consultation with the public is required, you should let your community know as soon as possible what your plan is. Offer meetings and surveys to gather concerns of the neighbors, clarify any common misconceptions, explain the process. No one likes change. Often what people are really concerned with is actually the construction process. The construction process might be, 6 months to 2 years long. That's actually a considerable short amount of time, but they would just like to know when it starts and when it ends rather than being totally against it. But to understand that, you need to listen more and really think and consider the concerns that are being raised and really get to the bottom of what they actually feel the problem is. It can feel very personal from as being the person who's proposing a development, but also as a person who's being informed about a certain change. It can be very challenging to remain factual, but remain as factual as possible throughout the process with anyone you're engaging with. And then your decision, as mentioned, you could get a planning permission granted. That just means you can start your development. Granted with conditions. There's sometimes conditions that need to be fulfilled. For example, if there's concerns about construction, you might be asked to submit a construction plan on how you will deliver your plan before you start. So in which case you would have to submit additional information before starting. And then you have other conditions that apply to your development in perpetuity. For example, it may be like no more than 20 solar panels are allowed to ever be built on this site. So if you then put down 21 panels, then the planning authority can come back and tell you to remove that one panel because there's a planning condition attached that you can't have more than 20, for example. Or you can have your decision your application refused, in which case you can appeal your decision. Your decision letter will explain who you can appeal to. So you either have a local review body, that's where a number of elected members will review the decision and make a decision. However, if it's a large application, your appeal would have to go to the Division of Planning and Environmental Appeals. That's a Scottish government department, and it would essentially be Scottish government and ministers making a decision on whether the decision should be overturned. Yeah, I kind of covered that already. There's also a circular on planning conditions, and they usually can be found at the end of a letter. And as I explained, they can be discharged before you can start your development, whilst you're carrying out your development, or after the development. There's also conditions that apply after or for a lifetime. And then appeals, I'm conscious of time. Only the applicant has a right to appeal. There is no third party right of appeal in Scotland. So if a application is approved, you as an individual cannot appeal against that. However, if yes, yeah. So I hope that makes sense. Sorry. But as I said, if your application is refused and you are the applicant, then you can go and appeal the decision to either the local review body or the DPEA. Appeals have to be done within 3 months of a application being refused. So you have to make sure not to miss your deadline there either. So yeah, an email will follow with this with the presentation slide. I appreciate this was a quick whistle stop. You can find more advice on our website. We have our free advice service, as I mentioned, and we also have information sheets that you can access. I've also had a look. Nature Scot has a range of papers on renewable energy and considerations. And then if you really want to have a deep dive, there is the Scottish Government circular on development management procedures, which really sets out all the nitty-gritty on how to apply. So yes, thank you very much. I'll stop sharing.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Anne. I'm sure that's picked up a few points that some of us weren't aware of. It certainly happened to me. So I've been making some notes, and without further ado now, I'm going to pass over to Callum MacDonald from Point and Sandwick Trust. Alex, my colleague, is going to be sharing Callum's slides. And there we go. And Callum, I'll leave that now to you.
All right, thanks very much, Kath. What I've done is actually put together the slides that I used as part of a community consultation for our battery. I thought it was the most practical way of giving you a demonstration of the planning process from the point of view of our community energy organization. And before I kind of just go through the slides quickly, there's just 2 broad points I want to make, which I think gel very much with what Anne has just been saying. As you will have listened to and watched Anne go through all the kind of various stages, you will have appreciated that it is quite complicated. Not just complicated in terms of, you know, the difficulty of some of the issues, that they do require some kind of serious thinking about it before you decide what you're going to do, but complicated just in the sheer breadth and spread of things you have to think about and deal with, and the amount of paperwork you're going to have to generate and produce to get from the start to the finish. But do not be put off. My first bit of advice is, as soon as you're having a thought that maybe it would be good to develop a community energy project in your area, whatever it be, that project might be, go to the people who have money, Local Energy Scotland in particular, and explain what you want to do and get yourself a CARES loan. And you use that to then apply technical expert advice. What you really want is somebody like Anne, who knows the system inside out and who can hold your hand and take you through the whole process and make sure that every single piece of paper that you need to supply is supplied and supplied in the correct kind of way. So don't think of trying to put this kind of application together by yourself. You really are going to need expert technical advice. And the good news is there are lots of companies out there in Scotland who can supply that for you. We used Wood Group for our wind farm. We're using Greenspan for our battery project. There's lots of groups out there. And Local Energy Scotland will actually give you a wee list of all the different people who can provide that kind of advice. And they usually expect you to tender and pick the one that you want. So you're going to get huge and expert technical support to get you through. So don't let the complexity of the whole thing pick you off. And the second broad big point I was going to make is that the one thing that you don't leave to the technical experts is the thing in which you yourselves are the experts. And that is not any of the engineering or electrical things, no matter how qualified some of your board members might be in electrics and engineering. That's not what you're expert in, really. You're expert in working with communities, liaising with communities, your knowledge of your own community. That's the thing that you are expert in and which no technical consultant can even compete with you on or replicate. And that's a very important part of the whole process, is working with your local community, get them on board for what you want them to do. Because you're not like a commercial developer who will say, right, let's just horse on. Doesn't matter if we get a lot of objections. As long as we can persuade the council, we're going to get this thing through anyway. You don't operate like that. You're always trying to get your community to go along with you. And you are the experts in doing that. And what you will find is, and this is the good news, is that your knowledge of your community, your ability to interact with them and consult with them and listen to them and adjust to what they want to see is one of your great strengths when it comes to the planning process. And it is why, I don't have latest figures, but I do remember from the time when people were building wind farms 10 years ago and more, 60% of wind farm applications fell in planning. They got rejected. And so all these people have put in all that effort and all that money, they ended up with nothing. No community energy project, as far as I knew, at that time ever got rejected. So that is a great strength that you have and something to make the most of. Now, at the end of this, I will tell you that we did get an objection in our most recent battery project, but I'll come to that in the end. So these are the two big things. Make use of the technical support. Don't even begin without talking to Local Energy Scotland, getting that technical support. And but rely on yourselves to do all the community consultation. You can always use the technical officers with you. You can hold a community meeting, and you can have the technical officers there to help you on any technical questions that arise, but you've got to run the meeting. You've got to meet with people beforehand, meet with the local committees, let them know you want this meeting, get people, open to talk to you. You've got to run these meetings, and you've got to digest. You've got to read the room. You've got to digest what's being said at these meetings. So I see two big points. The third big point I was going to make, and this is the last of the big points, is make sure that everything you do is bankable, as I say. That is that at the end of the day, when you've got all your bits of paper, planning and grid connection, all the rest of it, you have to take it to a bank in order to finance what you want to do. You've got all your bits of paper. The bank will then want to go through all your bits of paper and conduct a very thorough technical and legal and financial due diligence. And if you've cut a corner anywhere along the way, that's when it'll be found out, and you won't get funding from the banks or from any other lenders. So always be thinking as you're going through the planning process, yes, this might work, but is it bankable? Is it bankable? Would it pass the bank test when they get their guys running through it with a fine-tooth comb? And there's there's things that they're inventing all the time that you can need to be aware of, new rules and regulations that the bank will be alert for. So you've got to make sure your technical guys are fully up to speed, and you're constantly probing them. Is this going to get past the bank or not? Now, that's the three big points. Let's go through the slides. As I say, this is just an example of when we did get, when we were consulted with the community about the battery project. This is the slides I would use as part of the, the consultation and trying to persuade people. Alex, can we onto the second slide? Yeah, that's just a slide I would start off about who we are, but people knew us anyway about our existing wind farm and all the rest of it. So we'll go on to the next slide. And so I start with a problem about an explanation of the problem we're trying to solve with our new battery project. And I would try to make that an explanation that would make sense to local people. And so, for example, for the point of the new battery project was to assist the existing diesel power station run by the utility, run by SSE, manage the islands when the islands are cut off from the mainland. Normally we're connected by cable, but 2 or 3 times a year we get cut off, and there's a problem for us as community wind farmers because we have to shut down all the community wind farms on the island. And there's problems with the local community because when we get shut down and the cable is cut off, all the power has to come from the diesel power station, and that kind of cracks to life and then starts emitting large clouds of black smoke, and people don't like it, basically. So that is something, that's a kind of local issue that you try to make sure that people appreciate that what you're trying to do with the battery is help solve that local problem for them, as well as solve the wider problem of maximizing community wind farm output. So next slide. And that's just a slide showing how the battery would fit in the Lewis grid. Next slide. This is an explanation of how the battery would work and a wee picture of a battery so people know what it's like, etc. And the technical guy you can hand over that slide to the technical support person and he'll go through all the technical side of it. Next slide. And that's the kind of stuff that they really get interested in the local communities is, all right, what's going to look like, where is it going to be, etc. What's the layout? So you have various slides like this which show the layout. Next slide. And and also what is going to look, well, is it going to be fenced? Is it not going to be fenced? What kind of fence is it? Is it going to be a big blank wall? What is it? You have slides about that. The next slide. And then we're always very proud in Point and Sandwick that when we build our sites, they look great afterwards. We even have wildflowers on our wind farm site. So this is particularly in a battery project like this, it's at the edge of, well, it's in town really, at the edge of the town, beside the main power station. So we're going to have to put in bushes and planting and just make it look nice for people. The next slide. That's what that site looks like at the moment. There's the power station we're going to build right in front of it. So the next slide will show you, and you can barely see it, but if you're local, you'll definitely see it, and you'll be thinking about, do I really want that there? On to the next slide. And that's another kind of the view as it is now. And next slide, the view as it will be. So all of this is just designed to allay people's fears and concerns that they're about to get a big, energy thing on a patch of grass. That it is basically a contaminated area of ground. It used to be a kind of old town dump in the 19th century. So it's never been built over since. Can't be used for housing or anything. It's just a bit of scrub. So it's probably the ideal bit of land to use. And it's beside the power station, which it needs to be to work properly with the power station. The next slide. And the big concern as we got in meetings was fire. And this is, in the days of Google, you'll find somebody in the community who will be, they've got a concern, they can Google and they can get lots of data to back up their concern. So that's why you've got to get your experts on board to just see, right, is it, what is the answer to their concern? And in terms of fire, fire is an issue with batteries. The incidence of fires has gone down very, very dramatically as the batteries are got more stable and safer. And hopefully they're going to get more stable and safe in the future as well. And it's something that we have to be, as a community body, we have to be very mindful of, because we've got reputational risk. If you're a commercial battery developer, if it goes on fire, we've got a couple of nights bad news headlines, maybe even some pictures on the TV news. But by next year, nobody's chasing you for it. When you're the local community group, you will know about it for the next several years if something goes wrong. So you've got to be really super careful and super mindful of things like that. Next slide. And that was the last point. And that was basically when it came to the community response, as I said, we did get objections. And they were basically around, there was some worried about noise, some worried about sort of appearance. We were able to allay these, but there were people worried about the fire hazard. And hey presto, the Stornoway Community Council, which hadn't existed for several years, suddenly came into life. And it was full of people who didn't like our proposal. So it came to life specifically to oppose our proposal. And that could have been awkward, but the trump card we had was that the immediate local community beside the power station, who lived in the district of the town called Newton, they were supportive because they could see the benefit to them of being part owners of this particular project, and that they would get income coming into their communities for this project. So because the local residents association was in favour, we were able to sort of counteract that the community council view which had emerged. So at the end of the day, we got planning consent. So as I say, the lesson is, keep with the community, consult from the very, very beginning, let them know you're thinking of a project, consult all the way through the project, and that will be your greatest strength at the end. Thanks. Sorry I overran, Kath.
No, can everybody hear me? Yeah, that's fine, Callum, no problem. No, there were some really, really interesting points that you've made there, really pertinent points. And I don't think we've got Tom along today anyway, so I think we've managed to use up some of Tom's time. So that's fine. I will have a question later on if we've got time, though, relating to some basic information that Tom gave me about what he wanted to present on. But before that, we're going to move across to Amanda. Thank you very much again, Callum. Amanda is representing Porty Community Energy, and I'm going to let Amanda explain what she's going to speak about now. Take the floor, Amanda.
Hello, everyone. Nice to be here with you. So I'm leading on the solar project at Porty Community Energy. Porty stands for Portobello, which is to the east of Edinburgh, or East Edinburgh, rather. I've just been in the role for about a month, but the organization has been working on this since last year. So our project is to install community-owned solar panels on, now we're looking to do 8 community buildings in Portobello, Musselburgh, Leith, and Craigmillar, so all sort of to the east of Edinburgh. And those buildings, we want them ideally to have a community focus, like the Portobello Town Hall, but local businesses can also be all right, but not on domestic properties. So as Callum said, work with experts. So we're working with GenSource as our technical consultants who are based nearby in Musselburgh, and with IALA Impacts, who are providing planning advice and doing the planning applications for us, submitting those, and also seeking building warrants and LCR certificates and all that. So last year, before I started, they found 5 sites and did an initial assessment and then detailed feasibility studies and site surveys. And then we applied for consents and permissions. We realized from the feasibility study that we wouldn't be generating enough revenue from 4 buildings that additionally got through to make a very good business case. So we're now doing a second round of development, and that's what I'm leading on, finding 3 more buildings. So we'll have 8 in total. We're hoping that the annual revenue from the 8 buildings will be about £15,000 to £20,000 per year, and the profits will be used to fund Porty Community Energy community engagement activities, including our bike library and our community fridge, but also to support local community projects through a community fund. So where we had issues with planning was with the Portobello Town Hall, which is a B-listed building. It's community owned, actually, so we thought that would be a very good candidate. But we had to submit listed building consent, building warrant consent, and planning consent applications. The listed building consent got refused, so our planning consultants also retracted the planning application at that point. The refusal, I've just been looking into this, it was made by delegated decision, so by officers, not councillors on the planning committee. And they gave reasons for refusal. One was the detrimental impact on the character and appearance of the conservation area, and the other being the adverse impact on the character of the listed building. And these are considerations under the Planning, Listed Buildings and Conservation Areas Scotland Act 1997. After Anne was speaking there about the report of handling, I was just looking that up, and it does go into more detail about what they based that decision on, and it does look like maybe if we tried to place the solar panels in a different place, the decision would have been different. So I'm going to look into that more after this. But in addition to that, there were 9 local objections from local neighbors. The director who was leading on the solar project at the time said it seems like people are just very against solar panels being visible from the high street, and especially on a listed building. And Porty Community Energy, I don't think, had done much community engagement around this site in particular. We had around the whole project and get some local support, but we would have done a more proactive campaign around the benefits to the environment and to the community and how that might outweigh to see solar panels from the street and the impact on the listed building. But at the time, we were under-resourced and perhaps lacked experienced planning advice as well. So it's great to know that we can go to Planning Aid Scotland for advice, and also maybe ask the council in the future for a pre-planning application process. The director also said that the people objecting didn't seem to know that it was a community solar project. They seemed to think it was a commercial development based on their objections. So I guess if we had done more community engagement, we would have solved that issue. And going forward, we have a couple of great buildings that we want to include in the 3 additional buildings, but 2 of them are B-listed. And we've been thinking of, if we do want to go ahead with them, how we approach this. So Brenda, the director, was talking about commissioning I think it's called Heritage Statement, which talks about the positive impact and the steps taken to mitigate negative impact on historic buildings. It does look like we actually did submit one for the town hall, but it still didn't go in our favor, so I'm not sure that would make a huge difference. We're thinking about early engagement with the council, explaining the benefits and doing a bit of a campaign around that, including reminding them of their net zero by 2030 target. However, given that planners have to make decisions based on material considerations in the local development plan, I'm not sure that this more political persuading would make that much of a difference. And yeah, either way, as we go ahead, we'll do more of a campaign to get local support, engage with the community, and try to avoid neighbor objections. We have also just figured out that we have an option to do ground-mounted solar panels next to a couple of these buildings, which could avoid the whole listed buildings problem anyway. And we could also try applying for listed building consent for buildings in East Lothian and see if their council gives us a different outcome than Edinburgh Council. I'm not sure if there's much variation between the different councils on that, perhaps if they have different criteria in their local development plans. So that's pretty much it, but happy to take any questions. As I say, I've only been working on this for about a month, so I might not know the answer. Yeah, thank you very much.
That's great, Amanda. I'm going to spotlight you now. Thank you very much. And especially given that you only had a short notice to prepare for that, because I know Brenda was called away urgently this morning and wasn't able to make it. So, and not only have you only recently joined the organisation, but you were only recently told that you needed to present today. But that was really useful. Thank you very much. Yeah, so we're about to give everyone an opportunity to ask some questions, which I'm going to. Okay, so Alex, I'm going to ask for your help again. I'm just looking at the chat now, and we do have a couple of questions there. I think the first one might be for Anne. Alex, if you want to.
Yeah, so I think that's from Paul B. And it's, what does an area designated as ENV6 mean in terms of likelihood of planning being granted for community renewable scheme?
Yes, it's Paul Bowden. I don't know if you can hear me, Paul Bowden here from the Lossiemouth Community Development Trust. We're at the very, very early stages of looking at a solar ground array. And we've had a couple of things red flagged, I'd describe it as, and we're a bit concerned. We probably have alternative sites, but for our preferred site, ENV6 has been flagged as a red flag issue, and we want to understand that more.
Yeah, so I'm not sure, that must be a local development plan policy. So it's a local policy. I do not know by heart. So I think the easiest way, and I just sent the link in the chat, if you fill out our online form, then we'll be able to help you, and we can have a look at the policy and what that would mean for you. But yeah, at the moment, I don't quite know what that policy states, and then we can give you specific advice on the proposal you're having.
Okay, that would be very helpful. And I've got a second question, I'm afraid. We've had another issue, which is around, I think this is a standard one, or certainly for Murray. We need to have overall a biodiversity net gain. It's not agricultural land, it's sort of, I call it scrub land, but they probably wouldn't like that. No doubt it does have, it will have its own ecology. Yeah, we would need to have a biodiversity net gain, and that is perceived to be unlikely for the site. But there are certain exceptions, it says in the guidance, and we don't know whether community energy would help us get over that one as well. Obviously, it depends on the results of ecology surveys and the rest of it. But again, it's a red flag, and we're worried that we've got a couple of difficult red flags here. What are the exceptions that do community-led and owned renewable schemes have a better path in over some of these issues?
I think that sorry, I'm just taking this in because it's very interesting, because biodiversity net gain is a really big thing in England. So I didn't know that Marie was looking into kind of implementing that. There is currently a biodiversity and nature bill going through Scottish Parliament that may introduce similar requirements across Scotland. So it's interesting to hear that Marie is kind of already implementing that. Again, I can't really answer the question directly. I think when you carry out your biodiversity and environmental assessment of the site, it will make a list of the quality of the environment on that site, and it will also assess that if you put down your development, what kind of loss there will be, and then your assessment should also set out mitigation. So the assessment will be like, okay, well, you're taking this much shrubland away, so you need to replant X amount of shrub. And often, for example, if you have a local park or something nearby, you should talk to that environmental expert to see whether there is maybe any local sites where you could say, okay, well, there is a loss of shrubland here. We can't replant the shrubland because we've taken up all the land with our development, but we're happy to deliver shrubs or whatnot, trees on another site nearby. So I think you once you have found your environmental assessment person, a technical expert, then they should be able to advise you on that. But yeah, I guess because you don't know yet, you don't know what the mitigations would be like. But I don't think, there's plenty like cases in England where they're building thousands of homes, and then they mitigate that with more tree planting either on site or off site. So I don't think that should necessarily fully be a barrier to your proposal.
Yeah, okay, but we have to go through the process before we find out, is the bottom line.
Yes.
If you haven't done so, if you've done so already and you've got nothing out of them, then I don't know what to suggest. But if you haven't done so, I would drop into the council office and ask to talk to the planners.
Yeah.
And what if they've got a face and it's a local face in front of them, it makes everything easier, and they'll come up with some suggestions and all the rest of it. I think I find that helps for a community body.
Yeah, that sounds like good advice, actually. Yeah, okay. Yeah, thank you. And we'll follow up and ask for some advice as well. So thank you.
No problem.
Thanks for your question, Paul. There was another question in the chat by Charles in Glendarrell. What influence would a local place plan have if it includes the renewable development of the considerations being made by the planning officer?
Thank you, Alex. I was really doing this, asking this because we're presently doing a local place plan, as are quite a few communities in Argyll, and we have a deadline of something like April next year. And we've been discussing how we would include renewables in the local place plan and whether that's going to be advantageous to us when the various renewables projects that are available or potentially available to us come to fruition. And is it going to be a major advantage to us? bearing in mind that I think we're the only community who actually applied for wind turbines who got refused in 2016. So we're very much once bitten, twice shy. So any advice on that would be very welcome.
Yeah, I think so at the moment, because local place plans are fairly new, there is no legal case study yet. Some things are already now coming forward, but a local place plan is considered material consideration. So the planning officer should make note and say that there is a local place plan in place, and that local place plan is, for example, in support of a renewable energy development on a certain site. So that should definitely be noted down. But it is for now very unclear on how much weight it will be given. So a report could say from a planning officer, although it's a wish of the community, there is, for example, environmental concerns that in this case bear a heavier weight. Equally, a report could say, well, there is some environmental concerns, but because the community supports this, we will allow this development to go ahead. So it is a case-by-case study, case-by-case thing. But yeah, a local place plan, like that's why they were introduced in 2019, and they should, you know, reflect the wishes of the community, and that should be considered when making a decision by a planning officer.
Thank you, Anne. It's certainly been a very useful exercise for the community to go through, because it has focused minds on what we actually want. But yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, I would say in my experience, especially once you start receiving monies from any of your renewable developments and what to spend it on, a local place plan or any community plan really helps guide those next steps of like, okay, well, we're making this money now, what are we spending it on? So a local place plan or a community action plan does really help give you a bit of direction.
Thank you. That's great.
Thanks. Thank you, Anne, and thank you for your question, Charles. Alex, I'm going to jump in here because I can see the next question here is from Leslie Carr. And Leslie Carr and I have just had a very tiny bit of email exchange fairly recently. And I think Leslie's question, which I will, Leslie, you did all that. Yeah, no bother. No, that's fine. Absolutely. So Leslie's working on a renewable energy project for Dalwhinnie, which will involve individual wind turbines and battery storage on every property. They're subject to the CNPA planning and Highland Council planning. You'll have to enlighten me what CNPA is.
National Park Authority.
Thank you. That's it. I should have known that, shouldn't I? I don't live that far. And Highland Council planning, so have a lot of applications. Yes, I can imagine it's quite complex. We've been told by the CNPA that we will not need planning consent, but will need building warrants. So what's your question to Anne, Leslie, from that?
Anne, I really wanted to share my project with the communities that are involved in this and yourselves, because it's quite unique. It's a project that's not been designed or put up by any other community in Scotland and possibly even England. So I'm getting a lot of interest in this, and I just, you know, would like any pointers from anybody or from your organization about any things that you think I should look out for when I'm doing this with regards to planning.
Yeah, so because it's going to be on individual homes, right? And I'm not too familiar with Dalwhinnie, but for example, if Dalwhinnie is, or like all of it or most of it is not within a conservation area, you might be able to put solar panels on individual dwellings without needing planning permission. So that's the small section that are covered on permitted developments. I'm obviously not too sure because I've not done any background checks, but if that's the case, you might only need a building warrant, probably to check whether the roofs are strong enough to hold the weight of a solar panel, but you might not actually need planning permission for those individual buildings, unless the building is, for example, listed. Then again, we're in a different situation. But I would say in most cases, because you are doing individual buildings, you might need to apply for planning permission for each dwelling separately. So you might have to fill out the online form and submit multiple application fees for each dwelling, which may be a bit of a pain in terms of organizing all your documentation and stuff. So yes, I don't know whether you have any follow-up questions from these comments.
I've already had successive meetings with the head of the planning authority for the CNPA, and I'm in constant contact with the planners at Highland Council. And Dalwhinnie is very unique. We're the coldest village in Scotland. Our average temperature is only 6 degrees centigrade a year. For 5 months of the year, we don't get a lot of sunlight. Most of my buildings don't face the optimum way for maximum advantage for solar panels, i.e. east-west. That's why we've opted for wind, because there's always wind in Dalwhinnie. We're the second highest community in Scotland. There's only about 30 properties here. So the thing is, we're quite clustered together. So doing this is because we're doing surveys, we're doing environmental surveys. I was interested in the question from the previous person when he was talking about these environmental certificates and things. We're also working on flood defences, building bunds and things, and we've just been, our whole project's been held up because of to go get another environmental hazard surveys as opposed to an EIA. We had to do an EHA, and the park got us to do. We had to do at one point they wanted wildcat studies and freshwater pearl studies and rivers and all sorts of things. They got really, really technical and really overboard for what we're trying to do. But we spoke with the authority. I'd like to point this out. We actually spoke with the authority planning officers, and they understood our concerns, and we were able, by talking to them, to reduce what they actually wanted. And we ended up having an environmental survey that was much, much smaller, much easier to do, a lot less money, because at one point we were talking about £40,000, and we're a very small community. So we ended up getting the environment, but we did that by negotiating with them and talking to them and actually making them understand that from our point of view. And I'd like to say to anybody who's doing things like this, don't be afraid of actually going to the planning people personally and actually sitting down with them and making them understand where you're coming from. Because I mean, I've been doing lots of consultation papers just now, huge government ones, and for community action plans and all these things. And the thing is that the sizes of the paperwork and the papers, I've come to the conclusion that there must be thousands, not hundreds, but thousands of communities and civil servants sitting writing environmental stuff, and it's coming at us from all angles. It's very complicated, but just hold faith in your project and don't let them beat you down. just go in there and actually make your point of view, and you will win. Because they are reasonable, they do understand. In most cases, they do not want you not to have, but to improve your community by doing lots of these projects. It's not their aim to stop you doing them. It's a question of working with them, keeping them involved and keeping them on board, and you will win if you actually keep going. So don't give up.
That's great advice, Leslie. Thank you. I'm just going to very briefly, we've got a couple of minutes, and I understand some people have got 4 o'clock meetings, so may need to disappear. But for those of you who haven't, as I said earlier, Tom couldn't join us today. But one of the things that he mentioned, they had a very successful planning application for a solar array on Islay, the Islay Energy Trust on Islay. And one of the things that they did was they actually applied for a larger solar array than they originally planned, with the view to expanding it. They successfully got the planning, so they put the original development in, and they're now going to phase 2, where they're using the permission they got originally to be able to add more solar panels. So, and that's really a statement. There's no question. I just thought that throws a different, just a slightly different story into the mix, which may resonate with some people here. So I just thought I would mention it because Tom hasn't had a chance to present his case study today. And I don't know if there's anything that you'd like to comment about that kind of thing happening.
Yeah, so there's multiple ways in doing that. Overall, planners often refer to that as phasing. So either you submit a very detailed plan. Once you start your development, so you have 3 years usually to start your development, but once you've started your development, there's often no condition on when you need to finish it. So if you have approval for 10 wind turbines and you put down 2, that means you've started your development. So then you actually have until perpetuity to develop those other 8. If you have permission for 10, equally, sometimes you have a field and you might ask for permission in principle, which would say that in principle, you're allowed to put down 10 wind turbines, for example, but you will need to submit further details in the future. So if you then in principle have 10 wind turbines approved, and then you go in with further details on 5 of the 10 wind turbines, then you might get those approved in what is called a detailed planning application. And then you can move on with those first 5. And then once you're ready, you can put in another detailed application to get the next 5 approved. And that will then help you, for example, yeah, if you do a application in principle, and in principle, it says that 10 wind turbines are okay, but we need a flood risk assessment. Then you still have that piece of paper that they're generally okay with your proposal, and that gives you then time to do further research on flood risk, for example, or on environmental concerns.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much, Anne. That was useful information. I hope everybody who's still here, I hope everyone, those of you still here and those who've already left, have enjoyed today's session and found it useful. I've certainly made some very useful notes from the various speakers we've had today. I'd like to thank the speakers again for their time, for preparing and for coming along today to present. And I'd like to thank everybody who's spent the time coming along here today. I hope you found it useful. We have got a series of webinars, one a month, December, January and February, coming through the Energy Learning Network, topics to be confirmed. So please do keep your eyes peeled. We will be advertising those and sending information through on those for those of you who might be interested in the future webinars for the rest of this financial year. Thank you once again and have a nice evening, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Bye.
very much.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone. Bye-bye.